So this is Joe, and he will be presenting inside the hacker's playbook how we stopped a 20 million euro ransomware payout. Everyone, applause.
So, hi everyone. It's awesome to be here. It was a bit of a whim. I do blame Iceman and Joe Grant for getting me here. But it's an honor, and I do applaud the organizers for such an amazing conference, and for you for coming and listening to my talk. This is my first time at BalCCon. Not my first time in Serbia. I've been here quite a few times, but this is my first time speaking here. So. I hope you find it educational. I always like sharing some of my experiences and lessons, and I thought this particular ransomware case is always one that is something that I learn. When I learn something from an incident that I work on, it gets me excited, and it gets me kind of being creative. So this is something that I thought to share with you. So I'm going to take you, it's in two parts. The first part is to give you a bit of a context, a bit of an understanding about what was happening during the incident, what was going through the organization's mind. What things did I find that was beyond the ransomware incident itself? And then I'm going to take you through the second part, is really walking you through the attacker doing the actually ransomware itself, every step along the way. There's parts of it which I have assumptions, because beyond the initial access, I don't exactly know how they got some of the credentials. Likely it was through an access broker. Likely they actually were able to phish one of the victims. But from the moment that I do the remote access, everything I take you through is exactly how the attacker did it. I will share the real scripts that was used to walk you through some of the actual scripts that they had, and take you through basically as alive as I can possibly get it. So let's everyone hope the demo gods are with me today. So, because you never know when you're doing things live what might happen. So let's go through it. Let's take you through. So the first thing is I do want to, because I'm going to share some of the scripts, some of the real techniques. And I do always have to kind of, from what I do, is don't repeat this without authorization. So if you're going to do this at home, make sure you approve it with yourself. The intention here is to do no harm. We're all about doing good and making the world a safer place. So please don't target anyone else other than your own machines that you own. Always follow the law. I've been stepping the law a few times over my career. And I recommend not to get in the same situation I have on a few occasions. Some of you have heard my stories, so always follow the law. And again, this talk is to educate you. It's to give you knowledge so that you can take away and have fun, because that's what this industry is all about, is enjoying yourselves. So I want to talk about the particular variant of ransomware that this organization was dealing with, was Krylock. Anyone familiar with Krylock in the past? Anyone had kind of experience with it? A few semi-hands going up. So to give you a bit of a history on Krylock, it was formerly Crackle, which was kind of heavily around the 2016-2018 period. So Crackle went up to version 1.4, I believe, and eventually it was taken down, and it had lots of flaws in it. The encryption wasn't very good, and it wasn't widely distributed, but they ultimately were able to get some of the keys and distribute it to the victims. Around 2020, it basically resurfaced under the version of Krylock 2.0. And it was actually way improved. A much more sophisticated, better encryption capability. The encryption actually worked within like large file systems within even a minute or two, encrypted the entire system, but it was only encrypting the headers. I did reverse engineer the actually variant itself, and I found it was using the language pack as part of the encryption. So if the certain language packs were missing, therefore it would avoid encrypting them. So I do say that the ones that were distributing it didn't want to impact their own origin, so in order to stay safe. And interesting, actually, the creators of Krylock were eventually captured and arrested early last year in Spain and extradited to Belgium, where early this year, I believe in March, they were finally actually convicted. The creator was given 8 years in prison, and an associate was given 5 years. And they had over 60 million in crypto assets. So it's for me, it's interesting because it allows you to uncover some of the techniques and details in the incident. And it was one of the earlier incidents of ransomware that was ransomware as a service. So the creators of the ransomware were not necessarily the same people that was actually distributing it. So this victim, large organization, large transportation organization, very well known globally, all of a sudden had that displaying on the screens. Now it was interesting because typically when you find out you're a victim, you don't typically find out from yourself. You find out from other people around you. Your employees might be one of the first people to detect it. Sometimes you might be notified by law enforcement. The attackers contact you directly, which is interesting because in this case, the attackers were getting so pissed off that the IT team didn't detect the ransomware for about 2 days. So they decided, 2 days. They deployed it. They're going, okay, let's wait. They're going to contact us any minute now. What are they doing? So they went and they looked in the HR systems. They found the IT team's home telephone numbers and called them on a Sunday morning saying, what are you guys doing? Go look at your systems. We've got our basically UI and ransomware displaying in all the systems. What are you doing? And they're home with their families on a Sunday, having their morning dinner, and okay, we didn't know we're a victim. So of course it goes into crisis mode. So that's typically, it's interesting. Now, what was interesting in this case as well was when I was brought in to help investigate it. My role in this was to play the role of an attacker. Is how would I do this? If I was actually going to attack this organization, what things would I do in order to gain access? So my role was to recreate the attack, but reverse it from the victim machines right back to try and get to attribution. Now, excuse me. When I was given access, and I was given up to 5 years of archives, of logs to go through and try and investigate. And when you're going through incidents, it's always interesting what you do find outside of the ransomware that you're dealing with. Now, in this case, when I was going through the attackers' scripts and what they were using in order to actually move around and do lateral movements and privilege escalation, I did find evidence of other victims. Which is always interesting when you're looking through, because they're very lazy. They copy paste everything. Like there's one script, we copy it and they share it around. And unfortunately, one of the scripts had remained of evidence of another victim. They just basically appended into the log. And I decided, because we're on recording, I still can't release the name of the other victim, but anyway. So ultimately, I got permission to contact this other victim. I said, here, I'm investigating, maybe we can share indicators of compromise, maybe we can help each other out. Because I was actually getting help with another friend of mine who was working on another case very similar to this. And I got permission, so I contacted this other victim and said, hey, I looked at their website, I looked for disclosure, security, reporting, privacy and stuff. And so I contacted him and said, hey, I find that you're also a victim of the same case I'm working on. Maybe we can share lessons learned. Nothing came back. So I sent them another email saying, hey, maybe I can help you. Maybe they haven't actually detected anything yet. Maybe we can actually stop you from becoming a victim. And they responded saying, no, you're wrong. We are not a victim. We haven't had any ransomware. We've checked our systems. You're completely wrong. You're talking bullshit. I'm looking at your IP addresses, usernames, domains. I had everything sitting in front of me. So I said, okay, fine. So it was at the end of the case where I've actually went back and I was having to archive and forensics evidence all of my data on hard drives that had to be packed up, handed over to law enforcement. And it was only that method I was like, I need to notify them that the data I've got that contains their information is now going to law enforcement. So I thought, out of just courtesy, I'll send them another message. So I said, hey, your data that I've got in the actually forensics is now being moved to law enforcement. They might contact you later, I don't know. And they came back and said, yep, we were a victim. And we paid the ransom, and we wanted to keep it hidden. Even today, if the camera wasn't running, I would give the name, but it's a really large organization, which is surprising, because even publicly, there's no knowledge of them being a victim of the ransomware, other than the evidence that I collected. Now, interesting as well, as I was going through the evidence, you do find other things, other crimes in the organization. And when I was going through, 2 years prior, I found that one of the systems was running crypto mining software. So when you're going through the evidence, you're like, oh, crypto mining software. And ultimately what happened was one of the employees decided to make some money on the side and installed crypto mining on one of the servers, which was completely being utilized. And we calculated the energy costs of that crypto mining software over a 2-year period, and it ran into the tens of thousands of euros. So sometimes when you're going through these cases, and you're given evidence and you have to go through and analyze it, you do find other things other than the things you're working on. So it's always interesting. But in this case, the attackers contact the IT team and they're going, what the hell are you guys doing? Get into the office and start working with us and sort of you can pay the ransom. Now this organization, they didn't really have a really good incident response plan. They actually didn't have any plan at all. And it's really kind of the basic things. I've seen organizations where the incident response plan is encrypted as well. So always have an offline copy or backup copy. But we went through and we helped them organize and we quickly put together an incident response plan to help them respond as quickly as possible. Some of the things you learn when you're responding to incidents such as the ransomware itself is that they think about incident response plans, but they don't simulate it, they never practice it, they just go through these standard checklists. And it was really evidence that we were going through and they didn't think about, because they were a multinational organization, and they had to work across time zones. So what time zone are we working off? What formats are we collecting the disks in? What policies do you have? Do you have any naming conventions? Where are we going to store the evidence gathering, the logs? How are we going to regain access? How are we going to rotate credentials? So they never really thought about practicing these things. I can tell you, I was doing like same-day delivery off Amazon for hard disks in order to actually collect raw images from systems. And that's the last thing you want to do. I actually completely used up my own personal stock of sanitized disks just for this case. So it's really getting into, when you're going through and thinking of ransomware, this organization, they had some things in place, but they'd never really practiced. It was an IT team. They were not security kind of focused, security conscious. It was an additional responsibility, but it was not their job. And that's commonly what you see in large organizations. So as they became the victim, we're going through this scenario about what can we get back? How can we get back to operations? They were losing tons of money every day. They had no access to the ERP system, all of the data about their employees. They had no idea who was employed at the organization anymore. The employment contracts had all been wiped, the invoicing information, the supply chain, the contracts that they had in place, intellectual property, everything's gone at that point. So they're kind of trying to figure out what was still operational, what was still, and it was good because they were migrating to a cloud at the same time, and at least the cloud portion, some Office 365 is still available, but the main core systems were down. So at that point, they were literally going, on the Monday, they were going back to pen and paper to get their business back up and running. Basically, they went back to paper in order to recontinue their business. And the attackers still had access to their systems, so we were going, what do we do? Do we shut everything down? And because at the same time, the attackers had put an SCP, and they were dumping all the data onto an SCP server, which synchronized to cloud. And there was still actual trading. There was a database that was about 140 gigs in size. And lucky enough for slow internet connection, that it was taking such a long time to upload that they'd only been able to steal about 40 gigs of that database. So they still had active access. So we made a decision. We completely turned off the internet. We disabled all access for that organization to stop that data being exfiltrated. So when they became a victim, we were looking at what's the recovery plan? What options did they have? And of course, naturally, we will say, let's go back to the backup. But most organizations, unfortunately, at the time, they only had actually, the backups were designed for high availability and not ransomware resiliency. So the backup itself basically was also encrypted. I've seen other organizations, even recently, earlier this year, I've seen an organization who thought that having 3 backups was sufficient. And they had the secret backup. And that secret backup was all basically on a flat network, accessible with the same credentials. The attackers did an inventory scan, discovered it, and encrypted all of their backups. So you're getting into the situation where they're now considering paying the ransom. And you saw the initial that you've got 2 days, you get a 50% discount. They're really kind. I mean, ransomware, they're in the business. They want to make money, so they'll give you good discounts. And that was a 50% discount if you pay in the first 2 days. And that was a 10 million ransom demand that they were asking for the victim. So we're asking for 10 million. So now the CFO is going, trying to find out what the hell this cryptocurrency thing is and how to get 10 million euros of cryptocurrency. So the financial team's going and considering, let's pay the ransom, let's decide what we can do to get the business back. So we're going through all the options. There's a lot of options, of course. You try to rebuild everything. This organization was quite fortunate because we were able to find an old ERP system and old systems that was hardware migration, and they just never got to repurpose it. They were so busy that the systems that had been migrated a year before literally were sitting under the desk. And as we were doing asset inventory, we found them, and we're going, what's these systems? They're like, oh, that's one that we migrated from a year ago because the hardware didn't support the new software. And that was actually one thing that saved this organization, was that old hardware system. So my job, I was contacted to come in and basically look at this entire environment and think of it like the attacker. How would they do it? How do they move around? How do they gain access? In order to make sure that I was able to basically stop the attackers from doing it again in the future or coming back later. And so it's like almost like when you're going into a ransomware victim, it's like having a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle and you've got 200 little pieces remaining and you're trying to figure out what is this big puzzle. Because all the logs are basically wiped, all the data is gone, and you're basically scraping and peeling bits and pieces. So to give you a bit of context, all the domain administrators, domain controllers, completely compromised. So in that case, if you're talking about a rebuild, you can never clean up an AD when it's already compromised, because you never know what resemblance or what hidden things is left behind. So you're either looking at a backup, recovery, or a rebuild. They had access to all systems on-premise. All the data had been compromised, all on-premise applications. Only the on-premise, the cloud itself, had been avoided because they had never fully connected it to their on-premise AD. If they ever actually did a sync, AD sync with Intra, that would have been game over for the cloud, but they were fortunate enough they didn't have that set up yet, so that saved them from the cloud's perspective. How long has this been going on? So when I was given the logs, I went back 5 years, and the first evidence of the actual attack itself went back 7 months. 7 months before was the first initial access. And all of that was one successful logon. And we were able to go back and we looked at the different exit nodes, the different IP addresses that made the connection. And the connections were coming from a few different IP ranges. One was NordVPN, so they were using NordVPN in order to master tracks. Second one was Tor exit nodes. And then there was another hosting provider based in Amsterdam that was providing command and control, also hosting their scripts, as well as using it as a proxy as well. So those were the three locations. And so you look at the name address for the hosting provider in Amsterdam, it was very evident that it was consistently being used for malicious activity. So 7 months prior. And the 7 months, it was just one successful logon. That was it. 2 months before, second successful logon, again from another Tor exit node. And then 2 weeks prior to the actual attack itself happening, then it was the third last successful logon that didn't have any activity. It was just a successful logon and nothing else. Those are the 3 IP addresses that we're able to trace back, but no activity. So it was very likely that it was an access broker who basically had just testing, validating the credentials, showing the person they were selling it to that they had access and what type of credential. So they sold it on. The access broker who gained access 7 months prior, very likely through phishing. At that point, I know they just got a credential. They could have done many different methods. They could have basically had reused passwords across multiple systems. Could have been social engineering. There was many possibilities, but the most likely was phishing. I'm only assuming at that point. And then the attackers then had left it for 7 months, activated it, checked it, validated it, and then sold it on to the next criminals who were the hands-on keyboard. They were the ones that was an affiliate of the Krylock group. So they were not Krylock themselves, it was affiliate. They were partners. But they had actually access to about 5 different variants of ransomware, so it wasn't the only affiliates. I'm going to go cover the tools in the live demo. I'm going to show the backdoors they left. The data, lucky enough, they didn't take the full database, only 40 gigs was taken. Hopefully it was corrupted, but we've never seen, after monitoring dark web and communications stuff, we've never seen any evidence that has been used or abused. The timelines I've already given, and I'll show some of the evidence again. So let's get into the live hack. Are we ready for it? Okay. You're all excited. Yeah, I can see the enthusiasm. Yeah. So I know in between you and drinks in the party. So I know what's after this. So let's make it a bit quick. I'm going to skip all the initial access stuff because that's stuff that I'm assuming you already know. But the access brokers were using tool Crowbar, and what they were using Crowbar simply was just a validated credential. They get basically tons of word lists, tons of credentials. They would basically try going through public RDP facing systems, and simply through the word list, they're just hoping that one of the credentials is going to be successful. So you can see here that's simply targeting public facing RDP. They got a word list, social engineering. They bought the credentials from an access broker, and now they can see, yes, the credential we've got is actually working and successful. And again, they only need one successful credential in order to do this. At that point in time, now the access broker is proving that they have the credential. They buy it, 10, 15 bucks in the dark web, and now they have access to the organization. So the next thing they do is simply go and do RDP. Now, to give you a bit of context about who the initial victim was, this initial user who was basically the initial victim was an accountant. So simply, the attacker is going to log in under the stolen credential, if I can spell correctly. So the accountant was the person that was the initial victim, and the accountant basically had a system that was used for financial reporting for this organization. And it was a system that was publicly facing, but unfortunately it went outside of IT's knowledge. The accountant contacted the hosting provider directly and said, I need access to this system. So outside of IT had no idea because they actually had VPN gateways, they had multi-factor authentication in place, but since the accountant has a little bit of power, they pay the bills. They were able to convince the hosting provider to give them direct access. So this RDP facing didn't have any additional security. It did actually have vulnerabilities. It actually had vulnerabilities that could have been exploited otherwise, but the vulnerabilities to the system were very unstable, so you would see evidence of crashing on the system, which we didn't find. So we know that the vulnerabilities were not exploited. It was only the credential itself. So this is exactly how the system looked like. Okay, there was accounting software on it, but you see a little file here called important stuff. I'm not kidding you. This was sitting on the desktop, and if you click on it, the accountant made it easy for themselves, so they actually stored all their credentials for the server, the database, and their applications on the desktop. So, second mistake was that, of course, what do we all love? Cookies, sessions, and what the browsers love? Passwords. So in the actually password in the browser, I mean, this is why I will say that security by design is one thing, but security by default must be mandatory. And browsers don't necessarily have it by default. They have it, but not turned on. And unfortunately, the accountant had been actually using their personal email, financial systems, and had been actually going to the browser from this system itself, rather than the personal device or the company device. They were doing it from here, and it saved all the passwords. So now the attackers had access to everything that was stored within the password browser here, because there was no additional security. So simply, they were just giving access to everything and making it easy for them. So that was unfortunate. Now, the next mistake that this organization did was, if we go to can you spot the next major mistake? They made them a local administrator. Because we want to keep the users happy, we want them to do their job, so why not? Local, yeah, what damage can it do? so they made the user a local administrator on this accounting system because they were running databases and so forth. And so the next step, that was basically gold for them. So to give you an idea, as they were doing these sessions lasted maximum 7-8 minutes long. They would basically log on. Typically, it was around between 11 p.m., 4 a.m. in the morning. They would log on. They would spend 7 minutes. Then they would clean all their activity up. They'd have a clean script, hide their tracks, and then left. Next time they come back, 7 minutes. There was nothing that went beyond 8 minutes was the maximum until the final one was the maximum length of sessions. And they were doing that on purpose because some of the activity, if when they were disabling some of the services through basically the local admin, some of the services are under protected services and they will relaunch with a 30-minute window. So they kept within that window to make sure that they wouldn't be detected. So they're actually purposely keeping themselves stealthy as much as possible. So the next thing they did was they went to their hosting service, which was based in Amsterdam, and that hosting provider service, it had these files. So A, B, C, D, E, F, scan, and zap. These were the files that was basically sitting on the hosting provider. And what they would do now is they would basically disable AV on the system and then download a.zip. And a.zip, they would actually then place it into the C drive under a folder called Intel. And here you would have a script called enum. And under enum, the only thing that a.zip had was auto. Nothing else, I just pre-staged this, but only thing it had was auto. In auto, there was a bunch of scripts. There was a clean script, there was a disable security script, there was a launch attack script, there was add a new user, open RDP, and add sticky keys. These were the scripts that was based, so they basically could log on the system, within that 7 minutes, they'll disable security, downlog a.zip, and then they had access to this. So one of the things they would actually do is would enable sticky keys and disable security. This is the script. This would actually be a staging script. So you can see here, this is the actual script that they used. It would empty recycle bins, stop lots of services, clean out the shadow copy, and disable access to administrators from the system itself. So this is a script that we typically use for pre-staging. The next thing they did after disabling security was they download Mimikatz. So this is the exact dump that they used. So from Mimikatz, what they would then do in that 7-minute window is they would actually add these registry settings. And what the registry settings simply do is enable the ability for passwords to be stored in clear text. So this is simply one of the things that would do in order to be able to then do credential stealing. So the first script was really a pre-changing script in order to make the ransomware as effective as possible. A lot of that script, that disable security script, is actually now embedded within ransomware variants. I just wanted to show you that some of the things they did before they enhanced ransomware by doing it in scripts themselves. The next thing they did was they would then go and dump the creds. And simply, this was the script. This was the actual script. I really kind of always thought this was funny because they did color coding and they even put the title, Mimikatz Fast Dump, in the header of the script. I mean, if you're looking at logs, it's quite obvious something bad's happening. But this organization was not thinking security. They were thinking, you know, let's deliver a service for our customers. Security would come later. They would actually make sure the script would actually execute from the folder the path was in. And you can see here it was dumping credentials. And this is really where I found the secondary victim, the other victim, as I was going through and looking at the dumps of the credentials. This is where I find all the IP addresses, usernames of the other victim that I contacted. Now, of course, running this the first time, you're not going to get anything more than what you're already logged on the system. Making that change is not going to go back and get credentials from the past. So over a 14-day period, they would log in once a day for 7 minutes, do all this activity, and they would check this log, run it, see, did we get any new credentials? No. Close it, run the clean script, disappear, come back the next day. So the only thing, if you logged in outside of that 7-minute window, you would only see basically that service has stopped, and you also see that the event logs had been cleared. And you wouldn't see anything else. So sometimes, you know, if you logged in, you'd be like, oh, there's something up with the system. It was maybe like a problem outside of something else. It would just show gaps in the network activity as well. So the attackers were doing the best to try and keep the things hidden. And unfortunately for this organization, there was one thing that was running. There was a backup job running in the background. And then that backup job was taking a backup of the database. So the IT team thought, yes, part of our backup, we're going to make sure the system's available all the time. And we're going to log in, we're going to take a backup of the database, the transactional, the master, bring it back into the local system, and keep it just in case anything bad happens. That backup job was a major mistake because the backup job was running under, what type of credential do you think the backup job was running under?
Domain admin.
Yeah. So, if we scroll down, eventually after running this, after a couple of days, now we've got, and just for clarity, I did change the usernames and passwords for the system. It's not the ones the victim actually had. They were much easier. But I made them a little bit more complicated for myself. But ultimately now, after 14 days, I think it was day 13 when they got this jackpot. The backup job ran the night before, took a backup, they logged in, and they're just like, we hit the gold. Now, basically, we own this entire environment. So this set off a set of different types of activities. Up until this point, everything was just repetitive. They would log in, check, nothing, go off do their other criminal activities, drive their Ferraris, you know, go to nightclubs, come back the next night, you know, wake up with a hangover, log back in, nothing. And they would do that repetitively. I'm assuming about the cars and the alcohol, but I'm assuming that's what they do. But eventually they got the jackpot with the credential. The next thing they did was they actually, interestingly, they had GMER on the system. I was confused. I was scratching my head. Why are they installing? What are they running GMER for? Does anyone know why attackers run GMER? What do we use it for? We're looking for rootkits. It's an old Avast. We would basically run it to see what's. If you're ever in filter drivers, mini filter drivers in the AV business, you would basically run a filter driver. It would run at high altitudes, typically interacting with the kernel. And what GMER was to do was to find anything running that you would typically not see. So we would use it for looking for rootkits, for backdoors. If you look, actually, data loss prevention, encryption tools would actually show up here. Remote control software would typically show up here. I'm an old carbon copy guy, so I was actually one of the person over carbon copy, and we showed up as a rootkit because we were remote control, keyboard cloning software, so we would of course show up here. But what the attackers were using GMER for was looking for security products. What security products was not visible in the interface here. So they're actually using it to look for us. because our software would typically be hidden from the task manager from sometimes processes. We try to mask the security running, and they were actually running it to detect and seeing, was there anything running in these systems that they didn't know was there? They were looking for, not rootkits, but they were looking for us, the technology that would be used to try and detect them. So that's actually interesting. It was one of the first cases where I saw GMER being used in that actually context. They also had RDP+. RDP+ was actually, rather than using built-in RDP to connect to other systems, they used RDP+ because they could do it automated through scripts, and also use the credentials that they were actually harvesting as well outside of the domain controller. They also were using NetScan from NetSoft Perfect, or if I remember correctly. This was interesting because this actually was their failure, because this is what actually disclosed a bit of their origin. Because up until that point, all the IP addresses we had were NordVPN, Tor exit nodes, and the hosting provider in Amsterdam. When they used this tool, of course, when they start scanning, I actually did go back because there was a licensed version, and I did try and trace back, and I did trace back the license to an organization. I was kind of curious if they actually used the real license for this, but at this point in time, I don't know. But it was a licensed product, and I never contacted the organization to check if this was actually any of their employees using it. But ultimately here, when they did the scan, right-click and open device, this was actually the first indication of language. When you did this, all the things I've got here under the PSExec turn stuff off, download packages and stuff, this was all in Russian Cyrillic language. This was actually showing now that the language, I'm not saying country, because I know there's lots of countries that speak Russian, but now we're looking at basically a Russian-speaking attackers. That was the first. I actually had my kids translate this for me, because they do speak Russian, so handy kids so for doing reverse engineering sometimes. But so this was interesting. They were using this, which also told me that their skill set was more preferred Windows than it was Linux, so they're more kind of comfortable with Windows-based systems. But they did use this in order to actually create other staging machines and also laterally move to other systems. They did a mistake here as well when they did RDP+. When they used RDP+, they actually left a printer redirect on, and that was the first time where it actually exposed another IP address that we'd never seen before. That IP address that we find was actually in occupied Ukraine. So at the time, I don't know if that's origin. It could have been just another proxy, another secondary victim. But when you put things together, Russian speaking within the NetScan and the IP address that popped up that was from occupied Ukraine, you can start kind of connecting some of the dots. I did pass that over to the investigators, but I don't know if they've taken it any further. So now we can go back and we can simply, now we get credentials. We know there's no other software running in the background that would detect us. We've changed the configuration. We got the domain controller. So the next stage was logging into the domain controller. So of course they have the fantastic, really strong password. Did I type the right one in? Who knows? We'll see. So at this stage, from this action, it was 4 hours before they launched the ransomware attack. So when they logged into the domain controller, it was a 4-hour time frame. And I've seen that constantly. The minute they log into the domain controller, literally, they're basically now preparing for deploying and launching the ransomware attack. I think I may have typed it incorrect, but we'll see. Yeah, fantastic. So next thing they did here, logged in domain controller. They created a couple of backdoor users. My alias, I did this myself. So they created a backdoor user so they can get persistence. And after this, after creating the backdoor user, that was the last thing they did with the domain controller. They just created persistence. And after doing that action, they went back to their auto, and then they launched the attack. And at this point in time, because of all the things they'd done on the system, the system was running a couple of AVs. It was running, some systems were running malware bytes. Some systems were running F-Secure, but at that point in time, they were not detecting this variant. And ultimately, when they launched the attack, and they had selected their staging machines to the network scanner, now all of a sudden it spread throughout the entire network. Hundreds of systems now being infected with ransomware, using the disable script as a pre-stager, and now they sat back and waited for 2 days for the IT team to not notice anything. So, of course, some of the things they've done to make it easy for persistence is we can go back here, and simply the changes they made, they were able to then use PSExec to simply access the systems, so they didn't really need to use the RDP anymore. They also had the ability to go directly, because now they had the hash, and they were able to go directly to the domain controller and carry any activity they wanted. So simply, once they gained access, this is simply the playbook. And I see this almost every single, the initial access changes a little bit, but the lateral moves, the recon in the networks, the privilege escalation, the misconfigurations, the techniques that I see all the time is always basically, this is the blueprint I see almost every single case. There might be simple variations. Sometimes the scanner, they'll use PowerShell, they might use another tool. They might even use the own tools that the organization has. They might even hack into the seam and be able to get more information. But ultimately, this is kind of how they went through it. And of course, there's all the backdoors they made. If the user or the accountant ever changed their passwords, they can simply go back here, click on Util Helper, and now they have basically a backdoor using sticky keys. And I still see sticky keys all the time. It's kind of ironic, a technique that's been used for, 20 years now, is still effective. And of course, I can sit here and just drop in a new user, add it to admin group, add it to remote access. And because I'm sitting here, even if AV was running, it will only detect it within a 30-second time frame. So if I'm really quick, and I do this, and I just pop in a credential, and I paste it in, and close it, within that 30 seconds, it's not going to be detected. So there's a kind of delay in launching it from here, where it's going to be detected by AV. So this is another backdoor, another way that it gains persistence. So taking you through, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And I do want to kind of make a pitch for my podcast. So if there's anything that you want to do at the end of the day, you can actually go and subscribe to my podcast, which is called Security by Default, which I'm here all about is that let's make the world a safer place, and let's make security something that everyone can have. So hopefully this has been educational. I know now you're getting thirsty. I can see everyone's like, it's like almost thirsty, dry. You need something to pick you up. But thank you, all the best, and questions are more than welcome.
Hi. Did you see any evidence of later, after compromise, after getting the backdoor account, did they change anything in the group policies, in the auto-login scripts, in something like AD stuff?
Absolutely. It's a great question. The question is all about, did I see any other types of backdoors or misconfigurations? Absolutely. They had made lots of changes. So even certificates, they had added their own certificates in, so they could actually come back later into the domain controller. So when I got to that point of the domain controller and I saw lots of the objects and resources been changed and inherits and rights have been modified, it got to the point where you could never trust the AD. And we could not make the changes in order to clean it up. It was a rebuild. So we actually had to go and rebuild the entire AD and reconnect everything from scratch. Fortunately for this organization, the ERP system they found that was 1 year old, we used it as a baseline to recover the entire company's environment, which meant that, of course, after the 2 days, they were demanding 20 million euros. They give you the summary of the total cost. The actions that I did, I saved the company 19 million euros. The cost of the recovery operations was just over 1 million to get the company back. So a big difference between 19. I didn't get any of that, but but I was happy to get a company back because this case made me realize that the burnout and the stress that teams go through during these scenarios, there is a human toll to it, and that made me realize that when I saw people sleeping on the floors in the office and ordering pizza. That's when I made a recommendation to the management at the organization that these people will need psychology and therapy and some special care after this activity because it does take a toll on people from a personal mental perspective. So great question, thank you.
Any more questions?
One at the back and one over here. Well, I'll take both questions. I'm here for the rest of the night, so feel free to grab me at the bar. Get me a drink. Not the horse crap, semen stuff.
So you're dealing regularly with some instant response things, as you say in this talk, and I wonder. Those are really well-known techniques and TTPs, and it's like they do crazy dumb stuff you can really easily detect in the end, but there's still a lot of companies out there that get owned every day. And I want to ask you, when do you think this going to end up? Like, this going to end? Because we have the tools, we have the knowledge, but it's still not in the industry. So what is your expectation if there will be a case where you say, okay, this won't work anymore?
So it's a fantastic question. For me, it's unfortunate I do see it repeat over and over and over again. It's frustrating in my side. So just to kind of answer, I do a lot of incident response throughout the year. Typically, my role in incident response is as an overseer to review and to sometimes it's for government agencies and critical infrastructure. So I get brought into some of the bigger cases. It's unfortunate that you see the repeated techniques over and again. I think some of the things, a lot of these things can be easily mitigated. The problem is that in this case, you get users who are a little bit, I think less tech-savvy users are the best users. When you get somebody who's a little bit more techy, they try to do things in order to make their lives easier. But those things that they do tend to be more riskier. So sometimes people with a bit more knowledge can be more dangerous without the right training and right knowledge. So I really think one of my goals here is to get to the point where we move away from persistent privilege. I think that's one of the major flaws here in this whole thing, is that there was persistent privilege along every step of the way. So get rid of passwords, move to passwordless or passkeys where you possibly can. Always have multi-factor authentication, and let's get away from persistent privilege. Let's make it as difficult as possible. Because in this case, if we just made it a little bit more difficult, then the attacker would look for someone else, look for an easier target. And that's ultimately, I think somebody made the bearer comment, you just need to run a little bit faster than your friend when the bear's chasing you. And that's the case, unfortunately, here. But I hope we can find ways to make the world a safer place and that no one has to go through this.
Thank you very much, and I fully agree.
So.
Hi, I might have missed it from your talk, but you said that they wiped the logs on the initial box. So how did you reconstruct this? Did they also wipe domain controller logs? How did you know they connected once a day and did what they did if they wiped the logs every time? Or is it just from artifacts?
So it's a great question. And yes, they did wipe a lot of the logs. They did not wipe the network logs or the firewall logs. It was mostly the victim systems. So one of the ways that I was able to build things up. So if you're familiar with Lasso, log the timeline, super timelines. So you get lots of evidence and you put it through the super timeline. It creates you a chain of events. So I use log to timeline in this. And what I looked for was the clean event time. And I actually went through the times of all the times it had been run. So of course the clean event was the last event that you had. But it allowed me to backtrack and navigate the entire system to find the first systems that they'd compromised. And fortunately enough, one of the systems that they compromised, they didn't realize was actually a virtual machine. And the virtual machine had snapshots. So I was able to, which is one of the reasons I was able to rebuild the entire environment, was that mistake they made, was not realizing they were running on a virtual machine. So, but it was really difficult, pulling all this together and looking. I had to look at it from having nothing, and from the nothing, you're trying to look at the times and the techniques, and thinking about, when I see this log erased, what are they trying to hide from this log? Can I go look for somewhere else to try and find where there might be some evidence or some artifact or asset that might be able to tell me a bit of a bigger picture? But it was difficult. When you're in a ransomware environment and the logs are gone, it's hard to recreate and get visible. But through the mistakes, they made lots of mistakes. So these were not, I'd say, were not like an APT. It was just a criminal gang that basically wanted to make money on the side of their day job. So, great question, thank you.
Okay, that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you, everybody.
So, thank you. And My thank you slide. Might as well, I created it, might as well use it. So have a great party. I think I don't know if there's any more sessions. Am I the last one? Oh, there's one more session, so stay for the last. I'm not between you and drinks. So thank you.